Hi, it's Sonia and Rachel from Natural Care Clinic, and today we're going to talk about naturopathic approaches to methylation issues in women and in women's health concerns. And as you know, I only treat kids. So Rachel, who's our newest team member and a recent graduate of the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, is going to go through some of the research and testing and treatments that are out there for women who are struggling with methylation issues. So I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect, thank you. So this is just an overview of what we're going to be discussing today. What is methylation? We did discuss it a little bit in the last webinar, so I'm just going to briefly go over that. And then conditions caused by methylation deficiencies, commonly seen in women, common lab testing that we would do, and then common treatments for methylation deficiencies. So here is the methylation pathway. We looked at this the last time. It's just an overview of how the body works. The methylation pathway relies on vitamin B12 and folate in order to kind of process everything. And then this is another slide. This looks at methylation pathways, but more on a neurotransmitter level. So as we can see here, tyrosine is converted to L-DOPA, and then serotonin, dopamine, we see epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, melatonin, they're all affected by the methylation pathway. So this is just an overview. It looks a bit complicated, but this is what we use in order to kind of see where things are going wrong. And then this slide is basically explaining that there's two wheels, one wheel, the methionine homocysteine wheel, and then the THF and the 5-methyl THF. And SAMe is really the driver of methylation. It helps deliver methyl groups to 200 different pathways, and it requires ATP from mitochondria.
I mean, a lot of the basics for methylation apply to women and men, which is the webinar we did last time. But I think the interesting thing in terms of women's health is just how much the hormones and neurotransmitters are connected. So that's why I love those pathways.
Exactly. So here is a slide that we discussed last time. Methylation has a role in so many different areas. It turns genes on and off, and makes DNA and histones, helps process hormones, helps make neurotransmitters. It helps build immune cells. So it has such a multifaceted role inside the body. And that's why it's so important to make sure that you're able to methylate properly and then also break it down.
I think that's also why naturopathic doctors who are really good at addressing methylation issues can help so many people, right? And like I say, I'm not an expert in hormones, but it's a really interesting pathway because it is responsible for 200 downstream biochemical reactions, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then this slide basically just explains how it can be affected. So family history, genetics, environmental factors, food, stress, the microbiome, medications, and then chronic illnesses. So this slide just basically lists out common conditions associated with methylation dysregulation. So we see infertility, pregnancy complications, PCOS, osteoporosis, obesity, depression, anxiety, OCD, insomnia, schizophrenia, dementia, and other hormone-dependent cancers. So we're going to take a little deep dive into those and see how methylation affects these kind of conditions. So first, we're now going to talk about infertility. Studies have found that IVF cycles are usually failed when there's higher levels of homocysteine. So in the previous webinar, we discussed how homocysteine can build up if you're not able to break it down due to issues with methylation. If you're not able to methylate properly with B12 or folate, there's usually a buildup of homocysteine. So if you are going through IVF and you have low levels of B12 or low levels of folate, you most likely would have a higher chance of failed IVF cycles.
It's amazing how much, in certain conditions, if you work with naturopathic doctors, how it optimizes other treatments, right? I see that in kids who are prescribed medication, sometimes they're not really working well, and then we improve methylation and even their medications start working better. So that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Mm. And then with pregnancy, we also see that higher homocysteine levels in women that have spontaneous contractions in the uterine lining. We see that high serum homocysteine levels are also associated with pregnancy complications such as preeclampsia, preterm delivery, miscarriage, and low-term birth weight. So it affects so many different variables, not being able to methylate properly.
And we see some of those in the family histories of kids who do end up with developmental concerns. So you see
Mm.
that continuum, right, of familial methylation issues.
Exactly. And that's something that we're even going to touch upon
Oh,
in our next webinar with pediatrics. And then you
cool.
definitely give
And
us
I'll,
a deep.
I'll participate more in that. But I'm learning a lot. I think this stuff is interesting. I have a teenage daughter, as many of you know, so I find this stuff really neat to learn.
Mhm.
Mm.
And then we're now going to move into cancer. So studies have found a link between folate and B12 deficiency in endometrial cancer. There's been a correlation between hyperhomocystinemia or homocystinuria, which is high levels of homocysteine in ovarian, cervical, and breast cancer. There's also a negative correlation between cancer and homocysteine levels. So they found that if you have lower levels of homocysteine, you will less likely have those type of cancers. Now, this slide discusses osteoporosis. They found that people with the genetic homocystinemia develop osteoporosis at an earlier age. Um, So not only does it help predispose you to osteoporosis, but you're most likely going to get it at an earlier age. Elevated homocysteine levels is also correlated with low bone mineral density. They found that homocysteine inhibits collagen cross-linking in enzymes, increases oxidative stress, it decreases bone blood flow, and it also increases osteoclastic activity and decreases osteoblastic activity. So what that means is that osteoclast is what breaks down bone, and osteoblast is what builds up bone. So what happens with homocysteine is that it breaks down bone a lot faster than it should be making.
That's really interesting.
Hmm. Now we're going to move into mood disorders. A study by Cambridge found that older adults with a low B12 status had a 51% likelihood of developing depressive symptoms over 4 years. So they found that, low B12 is linked to depression. Um, and the reason because of this is because SAM is responsible for donating methyl groups for neurological function. So the SAM that we saw before in those two wheels, that is really important in the making sure your mood levels are improved. Studies also found with anxiety, the polymorphism, the MTHFR, is associated with anxiety. So those who with those polymorphisms with the MTHFR may be predisposed to anxiety. And as stated before, vitamin B12 is a cofactor for neurotransmitters such as serotonin and dopamine. And that's why if you're not methylating properly, it can affect your mood and emotions.
Yeah, I've had a few cases over the years in pediatric depression, anxiety, where SAMe or other methylation supports like methyl tetrahydrofolate were really phenomenal for mood. Like it was just like, and I know in the States they use some of those drugs for ADHD, but they're actually based in methyl donors like methylfolate.
Exactly.
Mhm.
That's amazing that you've been able to treat just naturally.
Yeah,
Okay.
refractory depression is treated with folate, even in that CTC, the therapeutic prescribing guide that we guide. It's like the giant 2,000 page book that we have to memorize for our prescribing exam. So it's in there. Refractory depression is treated with methylfolate, even from a psychiatry standpoint.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So here is the pathway that we saw before that I discussed, just showing how, serotonin is here and it's involved in methylation pathway. We see that, SAM is right here and it converts serotonin into melatonin. You see SAM over here. It's everywhere in these pathways. So this is just to re-highlight how important SAM is in like 200 different pathways in the body.
There was a study by Dr. Richard Deeth, and they actually looked at brain tissue, not to be gruesome, after people passed away, including children, unfortunately, who were diagnosed with autism. But the brain tissue showed for the kids with autism, they had 3 times lower B12 in the brain, but they also looked at the aging brain, and the faster the brain aged, the lower the B12.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
And it's such an easy, like, it's
Fix.
such an
Yeah.
easy, exactly.
Yeah, it's something that we can easily administer.
Mhm.
A lot of people aren't aware that they're just deficient in vitamin B12 or folate. It's just one of those things that I think is not raised enough.
Absolutely. Chris and I were in the Burlington Library years and years and years ago, and there was this old book, and it was something to the effect of like, could it be B12? Question mark. And then it went through all the different systems like neurological and cardiovascular, and it talked about this, hypothesis that B12 deficiency could be at the root of all of these issues within
Wow.
these different organ systems.
Wow.
Yeah. You can still get it on Amazon, actually. I think they have another edition, so it's not like 30 years old, but
Yeah. And then here are more neurological disturbances, OCD, schizophrenia, dementia. Once again, higher homocysteine levels and vitamin B12 and folate deficiencies are correlated with OCD, schizophrenia, dementia, and delirium. So we're seeing those neurological issues with memory, brain cognition are affected if you have low B12 or folate, and if you have higher homocysteine levels. Okay. And then now we're looking at sleep disturbances. Vitamin B12 is a cofactor in the synthesis of neurotransmitters, such as serotonin and dopamine, as we saw before in that diagram. And therefore, B12 deficiency can cause insomnia and other sleep disturbances.
And chronic sleep deprivation is also a major risk factor for long-term health issues, right? I'm not obviously an expert in how that relates specifically to women, but definitely in the comorbidities, like the big scaries, like cancer,
Mhm.
diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia. If you have chronic sleep issues, it has a major impact on your quality of life and your longevity.
Exactly. And, just having, insomnia at night, you're most likely going to be fatigued during the day. So it's not only just affecting you at night, it's affecting your daytime, your processing. You're going to have lower energy levels. You're going to have all those other neurological issues such as brain fog, fatigue. So it all ties in together.
Yeah, and irritability and productivity too, right? Like for all
Mhm.
those moms out there, it's like you try to get through your day, whether you're working at home with your kids, out of the house, it's a long day when you have kids. So something like B12 and methyl donors can make a huge difference. And I'm speaking from experience.
Exactly. So now we're moving into lab tests. As we said before, naturopathic doctors in Ontario can't requisition genetic tests, but some of the tests that is important for genetic testing is looking at the MTHFR gene, neurotransmitter testing, sleep studies. So these are the type of things that we can refer to your family doctor or your genetic counselor to see whether you can test for these abnormalities. We also we are able to do requisition for an oat test, look at SIBO tests, see whether there's issues with the microbiome, comprehensive stool analysis for the same reason, and then a Dutch hormone test to look at your hormone levels. And these tests are very comprehensive. Then we can also do blood work, look at your complete blood count, iron levels, TSH, folate, B12, cholesterol, homocysteine, zinc, copper, vitamin D, and MMA.
And even though we can't requisition the genetic testing for the SNPs, a lot of people are accessing them on their own and bringing them in. So it's important that we know how to kind of look at those tests and what those SNPs mean. And I always say, like, I started looking at SNPs, oh my gosh, how old am I? Like 16, 17 years ago. And I was actually interpreting SNP reports for other naturopaths around North America. So I got really obsessed with the SNPs. And now it's not just the way your genes are acting, right? It's the way that they're performing. So I think that's where the other testing actually for me has been more helpful. You can have a beautiful gene, but then you can be exposed to a toxin. It's not working as well. So you might have an MTHFR gene that should work beautifully, but you're exposed to something like lead, or you have too much yeast or mold. And then you can also have an MTHFR gene that's not so effective, but it's not being bothered as much by toxicity. So it's the interplay between the genes and the toxins. And so I think physiology, some of the tests you talked about, like the oat and the blood tests and the stool tests, that's how your genes are performing.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last slide is just talking about treatment recommendations. It's very similar to what we discussed with the men slides. If you are deficient in vitamin B12, we would recommend a methyl cobalamin over like cyano or hydroxycobalamin, riboflavin, pyroxidine, vitamin B6, and then supplements such as folate, SAM-E, vitamin D, omega-3 fish oil, glutathione, carnitine, creatinine, probiotics, herbs to support the mood and improve your neurotransmitters and hormones, and then diet. I also feel like diet has a big role. A lot of the things that you can find in supplements can just be in your diet alone. Especially like leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables. They are high in vitamin B12, iron, those kind of things that can improve your mood and functioning.
Yeah, and I always sort of look at this whole debate on eggs, right? I grew up in the 80s, and so we were told, you shouldn't eat fat, you shouldn't eat salt, you shouldn't eat eggs. And a lot of that turned out to not be true, actually. But the choline in the eggs is really great for the methylation cycle. Your methylation cycle, half of its job is to make choline, phosphatidylcholine for cell membranes, and creatine, which puts energy into the muscles. So it's interesting that you've got the creatinine in there. In your supplement list, because if you provide that as a supplement, at least to kids, you're saving the methylation cycle. So it's neat. And I wouldn't have thought to sort of be giving it to women outside maybe athletes, but recently I've been thinking a lot more, and we're going to do a webinar on seniors, which I'm really excited, right, to hear more about your research on that. But I think the older women, I think, can really benefit from methylation support in general. But the creatine is a fascinating one because it is so safe, right? It's inexpensive, it's safe, and it spares your methylation cycle, puts energy into your muscles. So it's cool. I know some of the supplements are the same, but I think what people hopefully learn from your information is that it can address an issue that they're dealing with, right?
Exactly.
Because I wouldn't necessarily think PCOS and methylation, or I wouldn't think, some of the things, but hormones are so much a part of the methylation cycle's job in terms of balancing them. So yeah, it's like the lens. You look through the methylation lens and you can see it can help everything.
Yeah, it's interesting because like when I was doing my studies to see how it involves so many different conditions and they manifest in different ways for each person.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so easy to test something like homocysteine and track it as an outcome measure, make sure even people who are fairly well, we have a lot of people at whatever age, and they're interested in prevention, right? This is a huge part of the reason, part of the information that I started looking at way long ago in methylation was actually in cardiovascular health. And so there's a cardiologist, no joke, his name's Frank Sinatra. But he talks about methylation in the cardiovascular system. And that's actually where I learned a lot about methylation as I was sort of jumping off into the world of autism, developmental delay and stuff. So
That's really cool. It's really fun to listen.
amazing. Thank you so much again. That was great.
Yeah, thank you for joining me.
Keeps me out of trouble. We'll see you guys next time for another methylation webinar by Rachel and with my little snippets. Maybe next time pediatrics, I'll share more.
Yes.
You won't be able to get me to stop talking.
Perfect. Thank you.
Take care.